You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
CYTV
Here on the Daily Signal.
Welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC for years. And I do mean years, close to at least 2 decades. Whenever there has been a particular news story that has broken, in which individuals on the left are cast in some kind of a bad light, the story is always Republicans pounce. Republicans seize. It's Republicans who are noticing that's the problem. And then whenever a Republican or some individual on the right makes a boo-boo, makes some kind of mistake, the story is Republicans have made big mistakes, and this is why they're all stinky, evil, fascist, racist, whatevers. And that's not the case anymore. And the reason that's not the case is because the left has completely overplayed their hand, and after trying to demonize over half of the country and taking away the rights almost en masse across the board with Americans on medical services, with Americans on the Second Amendment, with Americans on free speech, the First Amendment, you saw a major blowback in the November elections and really throughout the second Trump campaign. And now the left is behind. They're trying to play catch up. And they're still trying to run the same old stories. The Republicans pounce, but that news cycle is 2 or 3 days old, which in news might as well be 3.5 thousand years by the time a story is 2 or 3 days old. And not only that, the Trump administration, the Republican Congress, Republicans in media, in their own media spaces, participating in the podcast space, the independent journalism space, the social media spaces, are now in a new leadership position that the left can't even begin to fight. And so tonight, I want to take you through a few key incidents that show the ramifications of this brand new media landscape and environment, and most importantly, what it means for the midterms. Because this is what everyone's looking towards right now, whether Trump is able to deliver on the majority of his promises or enough of his promises that voters then go to the polls for congressional elections, which is not usually a thing. People don't usually go to the midterm elections to elect members to Congress based on the like of a president. Usually it's the extreme dislike of a president in their Congress. So let's talk about some of the biggest incidents in this particular category. Democrats do not understand Americans at all. They don't. After losing in November, we have been told for weeks and weeks and weeks that Donald Trump was going to be extremely unpopular, that all of his policies are going to be terrible, that Americans were going to hate him. And after Trump took office in January, we were told, all of his policies, Americans can't stand them, and they can't stand DOGE and Elon Musk, and they can't stand the Republicans and passing all of these transphobic bills, and they can't stand, and they just on and on and on and on. And he's slipping. Trump and Musk are fighting. Trump and his son, Don Jr., there might be some problems here. And it turns out that that is absolute baloney. Because every poll that comes out on the same networks in which we were told that all of these things were wildly unpopular, the opposite ends up being true. So here's CNN today.
Such a clear trend among the American public. So transgender female athletes in women's sports, only 18% of the country says that they should be, in fact, allowed to participate in women's sports. Compare this to the opposition. I mean, my goodness gracious, 79%. You rarely get 79% of the country to agree on anything, but they do, in fact, agree on the idea of opposing transgender female athletes in women's sports.
So, given the 80-20 style issues that have taken a pretty significant hold over the American people, why isn't this leaching into the media? Why don't we actually see individuals over on major outlets that are starting to make moves towards addressing issues that Americans are considering kitchen table issues, common social issues, common economic issues, common international issues? And the reason that you're not seeing any firm move towards the center from the left side of things is because they've already put all of their chips in these social ideas, these far leftist social ideas that are an ideological capture point for the party. They've already put all of their weight in suggesting that because America is an evil place, because it is so oppressive, because it is so stinky and terrible and awful, that they have to stick with those particular groups. They have to stick with those particular causes. And we'll look at that a little bit later tonight. But first, more polling has now been released. This is from the Neapolitan News Agency. 2,000 registered voters conducted between March 3rd and 6th show that the approval rating for the President of the United States, and at the moment, his agenda, is currently sitting at 51% approval. Now, the disapproval rate for President Trump is 47%. Trump is continually leading in these issues. As for the most important issues for Americans at this particular point in time, 38% of Americans still view the economy as the most important, 16% view immigration as the most important, 8% view war and international issues as the most important, 7% talked about the Trump cabinet itself in rather a negative light, 27% said something else entirely. This is really where you start to get into the really rough moments for the Democrats. Right now, across 3 separate polls, the approval rating for Democrats in the House and the Senate is below 25% across 3 separate polls. They have an approval rating of below 25%. That's the only opposition to the Trump administration there is right now. And they have not found a single way to gain any kind of an edge on him. But that's not going to stop him from trying. The latest idea that's come up to the left, the latest card they're ready to pull, seems to be that Trump is really bad because he's firing veterans. This is the new line. So they're kind of an Elon Musk style thing, only it's really bad. They're going to try the Trump hates veterans approach again. Here is, let's see if we make sure that we have this one lined up. It's good old Congresswoman Mazie Hirono. Real special.
We are in the midst of thousands of people getting fired. And as mentioned, every group that gets fired includes a lot of veterans. And so it is not just the VA that fired most recently, 1,400 people who are on probationary status, but you have the DOD, Department of Defense, you have the Department of Justice. Thousands of people are getting fired, not because of any indication of fraud or waste, but indiscriminate firing. So there is chaos and fear all across the country at the moment.
There is no chaos and fear across the country at the moment, though. There is. The polls don't show that there is any sign of chaos and great, outstanding fear around the country. I've seen photos of massive Trump protests that turn out to be maybe like a couple dozen people at various state capitals or major cities around the country. That's it. Like the occasional protest is the chaos and fear. By the way, the veterans that are fired, Trump is, again, going through federal agencies and removing individuals that have not been shown to do any immediate and useful necessary work for the federal government. There is no federal job that is owed to anyone. It just so happens that at the VA, that Trump is reducing the numbers back down to 2019 numbers, which, you know, it is worth noting that since 2019, by the way, the approval rating for the job that the VA has done has plummeted. But I mean, the Democrats are going to go on, oh, he's firing veterans, he's firing homeless, pregnant women and children. Oh, it's just terrible. It's not going to work, but they're trying the exact same thing. The next thing they're trying is the rumor mill strategy. So we've got to get in on the rumors of the infighting, because it's like the 2016 playbook never really had anything to it, but it did okay. You know, you tried that first Trump administration playbook from the media line, and it didn't land. So instead of writing a sequel and trying something better, they're back to the exact same stuff again. Radio folks, we're going to let you head over to commercial, and we'll catch you guys in just a second. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. So, a new set of rumors. Because you hear about this every couple of weeks. There's some kind of, there's infighting. Someone really didn't like what the Trump administration said. A couple of days ago, it was Trump has put Elon Musk in his place. And all of the various outlets started reporting on the reporting of someone else who heard from an unnamed source that's totally anonymous, that we totally know is inside the Trump administration, that things are bad and scary and fearful. And the latest one is that Donald Trump Jr. is going to be running for president in 2028. Sources say. Now, did they list these sources? No. But this report came out, and immediately a lot of people in the center and on the right raised an eyebrow and went, Didn't like JD Vance kind of take the stage as the vice presidential candidate, and since then has got a really huge approval rating from the right and from the center. What are you talking about? I've never heard anything about this. Well, it turns out that the rumor was complete garbage. It was hogwash. There was absolutely nothing to it. So Mediaite reached out to Donald Trump Jr. asking if it was true that he is considering a run for 2028 in an amazing statement or whatever. He said, quote, "I accurately predicted that my buddy JD would be an instant power player in national Republican politics. So your theory is that I worked my butt off to help get him the vice presidential nomination because I want to run for president in 2028. Are you bleeping retarded? I'm actually glad you're printing this BS, though, because at least now the rest of the press corps will see how crappy your sources are and how easily you're played by them. Congratulations, moron." The idea that the media is going to be able to throw in a wedge and get between the Trump administration individuals, just like they did in 2016-17, ain't working. It's an old playbook. It's not effective anymore. And so right now, the Democrats are coming to extreme issues for the party, both in the media landscape and on the political landscape in the House and the Senate, with really old plays that are dusty and that are tired. There are targets to punch at with the Trump administration. There are things they could criticize. Absolutely. Are they actually going and hitting any of those particular things? No. No, they are not. So far, the only things they've got are Trump hates veterans, which everyone knows is not even remotely true, coupled with a couple of very special moves in the next segment we're going to chat about, which boil down to the classics. Racism, burning things down, LGBTQ plus 2IA 8765309, Jenny, call my number. It's the same junk. It reminds me a lot of a car that has bad tires as it is, just spinning its tires endlessly in the snow. It's not really going anywhere. It just looks bad. It's losing potential and kinetic energy. And if the Democrat Party can't even respond to polls the way that they're leading, yeah, sure, Trump's approval rating looks like it's probably going to hover between 50, probably a low end of 48% in approval rating, probably a ceiling of about 58, depending on the poll. And that approval rating is going to be pretty steady. For the Democrats, the number is going steadily down. And as we talked about a little bit last night on the show, the serious negative implications for that party heading into the midterms is if you can't get enough of a voter base on the independent and the left-leaning side to come out to vote for you, and Republicans take 60 seats total in the Senate, I tell you what, Left, you think it's been a wild couple of months. You've seen nothing yet, and boy, you deserve every little bit of it. We're going to be back in just a second. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast. Now that we've got the radio crew and the live stream crew back together, and I've seen a couple of the comments on the live stream side of things, and I got a text last week from someone who was listening to the radio side of things, was a bit confused. I'll try to clear some of that up. I apologize if I haven't been clear in what we're up to there. The show is syndicated nationally on a variety of different platforms because it's a brand new media age. Not everyone goes to radio or TV. Not everyone goes to podcasts or live streams. And so what we try to do is reach as many people as we can and make it easy as possible for them to listen to. The barrier of entry, in my opinion, should be very low. So the FCC requires, if you are on affiliate television or so like the number station on air TV stations, not cable news, or if you're on a radio station, you have to have, and you're not a nonprofit because the rules change if you're a nonprofit, then you have to go to commercial a certain number of times an hour or like a total number of minutes, depending on what region you're in of the United States, of course. So we have to drop a lot of the crew off over on the radio side, but everyone on the live stream side isn't particularly fond of listening to the radio commercials or elevator music in between. So what we're trying to do, because the show is live, it's 7:22 p.m. Eastern time right now. The show is live. We don't want to just give you guys canned footage and then let the radio operators sort it out. So we're trying to let the radio crew take a bit of a break on the commercial and hang out with the live stream crew at the youtube.com/Daily Signal on X. We're working on it. So it may not be flawless. And those who are on the podcast side of things, you may have no idea at all what I'm talking about. And all I can say is tune in live with us. It's much better. So what are the Democrats focused on then? If they're not actually focused on the real concerns of the American people, if they're still focused on Elon Musk and everything, what do they actually have in front of them? So far, the Democrats seem to be hyper-focused on three things. You've already talked about Elon Musk and DOGE. They can't let that go. They're also focused on what they consider to be their biggest flaw, which is a communication issue. A couple of weeks ago on the show, I aired a clip of Jon Stewart talking with Jen Psaki, the former press secretary for Joe Biden, circle back lady. And it was so strange to watch Jen Psaki suggest that the right had an amazing superpower that the left wing apparently had never heard of. And that was that the right wing had this media ecosystem that supported each other, which I'll be honest, I'll be fair. There's a little grain of truth in that. You never really see Joy Behar on The View, bringing on Joy Reid from formerly of MSNBC, bringing on Brian Stelter from CNN. You never really see that. The right, individuals on the right and on the independent side of things, yeah, a lot of us do bring each other on because for a long time, though there are no other way to get out the messages, given that a lot of the mainstream media channels were kind of locked down. So Jen Psaki and Jon Stewart made the critique that the left really needed to embrace the communication strategy that said, we need our own Joe Rogan. We need our own RFK Jr., who used to be on the left, and then they kicked out. But they believe that, well, if they just start using social media like the right does, so if they start making memes and, they get out there and they start getting hip with the youths, then all of a sudden this is just going to save the party. It's going to save the day. And I guess sunshine and roses for the Democrats from that point. And I kid you not, this week may have been the worst social media week for the left wing in the United States in history. I've never seen a worse social media week than this. The Gen Z brain rot is at an all-time high. So 2 weeks ago, Ken Martin, the new elected chair of the DNC, who I guess worked on Tim Walz's campaign, he's a big Democrat in Minnesota, whoop-de-doo. They elected Ken Martin, who looks like a rejected sitcom dad for a guy whose wife is sleeping around. That guy released a 5-page memo on his plan to fight Donald Trump. And I was flabbergasted. By the way, I clicked on that memo so fast that my ad blocker kicked in on the browser and wouldn't open it for a second. And I read through the PDF, and then I brought it up on air later, and I read through it on the air. And what I read was 4 pages of how much he didn't like Donald Trump. And then on the very last page, in the latter half of the page, on the very last paragraph, he said, here's what we're going to do. And I thought, all right, here's the strategy. As a conservative pundit, I'd kind of like to know what, they're doing, to know your enemy. Before you can defeat your enemy, you need to know your enemy, kind of the old strategy. So I'm starting my way through this paragraph, and he gets to a part about how they're going to sing the Union song, Which Side Are You On? Which we had just heard a group of federal office people singing out of tune, out of key. And I thought, that's kind of awkward and bad and not good. All right, next sentence. And there was no next sentence. He basically ended it like a New Testament letter. He's like, peace be with you, and say hi to Timothy. Amen. And that was the end of the letter. And I was like, oh my gosh, their whole plan is to sing. Certainly that can't be true. Certainly. I must be wrong. That must be a metaphor, right? Oh, we're going to show Americans that we're with them as the working man, just like when we sing, they'll know that we believe in them. And I feel like this is when theater majors hype themselves up to feel important. When we sing that last number, people are going to feel inspired. And I thought it was a metaphor. No, their whole plan is to sing. Al Green got censured, who we'll talk about in just a second. His entire plan, sing. The House floor, sing. Now, the National Institute of Health, who's been pushing a bunch of transgender nonsense studies and likely editing academic studies over the last couple of decades for political reasons. The former NIH director, Francis Collins, today at a protest, just whipped out a guitar like a really unathletic college freshman and just started singing at a rally to try punching back at the Trump administration. It's painful. You're still going to watch it, though.
We're joined together by this noble dream. Have you got that? So it's just all the good people, but the second line, part of this family, and the last line, we're joined together by this noble dream. Do that with me. This is a song for all the good people. Come on. All the good people who are part of this family. This is a song for all the good people. We're joined together by this noble dream.
Okay, so a few quick notes here, just as someone who is actually a musician. I'll be the snob for just a second and say he's singing in the key of C major. His guitar is out of tune. So he's singing in C major. His guitar is about 50-ish cents flat. It's not good. He can't carry a tune. And he's trying to direct people and play guitar at the same time, which is also known as the Achilles heel of every contemporary Protestant church in existence. It doesn't work because you can't direct the crowd and strum the guitar at the same time. It doesn't work. The Counting Crows had an entire song about this, but I digress. It's extremely cringy. It hurts. And I guess they're just going to sing. Americans are extremely in favor of federal employees who are useless being canned. And when the guy gets up to protest, starts singing and playing guitar, you know what that does? It reaffirms that American suspicions were correct. You don't get up there and say, these are the 18 things I did this last year that saved lives. Nope. What did he get up there and go, we're all together, oh yeah. That's the whole thing. And it's humiliating. Then you get to the social media videos from like Rosa DeLauro. Again, extremely painful. They hurt. For those of you who are over 50 in the audience, this is a Generation Z form of speak, and it hurts my soul. So if you don't understand what's going on here, don't worry. She's not saying anything that makes any sense anyway.
Yo, this is the Ranking Rizzler on Appropriations, serving Connecticut's 3rd District. It's time to enter your dark academia Congress era.
So this is Rosa DeLauro with the purple hair, in case you were wondering. It is, in fact, that painful.
All right, besties. House appropriation is the money moves in Congress. We are not chasing the bag. We are the bag. Democrats are making life smoother through government funding. It's giving, it's giving. So Sigma, main character energy.
Taxpayer dollars. Taxpayer dollars, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. It reminds me of that old Steve Buscemi clip.
How do you do, fellow kids? What?
It hurts. It's just painful. But they're going to keep trying it. So we'll get to Al Green here in a second. Radio folks, we'll catch you in just a minute. It's the Tony Kinnett cast here on the Daily Signal. Al Green has now leaned into he was censured from Congress, not because he stood up and started swinging his cane around like Colonel Sanders on meth, but because actually Speaker Johnson is from the South. He's from Louisiana. So therefore, it was like a white plantation owner yelling at like a black man or whatever. This is from the mouth of Al Green, who I think meant to say insidious and said invidious, which is a slightly different definition here, but no one's ever accused Al Green of being smart.
Invidious discrimination in the House of Representatives. I'm a son of the segregated South. The rights that the Constitution recognized for me, my friends and neighbors denied. I had to sit in the back of the bus, the balcony of the movie, drink from a colored water fountain, and my relatives who committed some crimes were locked up in the bottom of the jail. I know what invidious discrimination looks like. The Klan burned a cross in my yard. I know what it smells like. I was in filthy waiting rooms, and I've been in places where I didn't want to be, and I know what it sounds like. I've been called all kinds of ugly names. So I know invidious discrimination. And when the speaker decided that I would be removed, and then there was this motion, this resolution to censure me, it became obvious to me that I was not being treated as others were.
Mm-hmm. You stood up in the House and swung your cane around in the middle of a joint session of Congress address. When the House has been brought to order, everyone else was sitting down. I don't care I don't care if it's Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't care if it's Nancy Mace. I don't care if it's Ilhan Omar. I don't care if it's Rashida Tlaib. I don't care if it's Elizabeth Warren. I don't care if it's the ghost of Mitch McConnell. I don't care. If you are in a joint session of Congress and the Speaker of the House has rapped the gavel and brought everyone to order, you're supposed to be in order. That's how it goes. Oh, I was being treated unlike others were treated. Yes, because you're the only one standing. You petulant, doddering old fool. And the Democrats want, man, I wonder why our polls are so low. I can't believe, why is Scott Jennings getting a raise at CNN and no one else? Man, why are people no longer watching MSNBC? Man, how come nobody's coming to these leftist rallies? I don't understand it. I've got a couple of ideas, but you're too busy screaming from the rooftops how stupid you are to listen to it. So here's Joy Behar saying the real reason the left is struggling is because they're not willing to bleed and die for the resistance.
But it didn't unite them all because 10 Democrats voted to censure Green.
Wow. Do you want a list of the 10?
Do you want to hear their names?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Why go after them, too? Go after the Republicans.
Because they don't know how to fight and be part of an opposition party. Representative Green gave them the example. The Democrats are not meeting the moment.
They're like not meeting the moment. He stood up so boldly, like a unicorn on a dream of a fairy. And it was inspiring. Oh my God. Please, listen to the words of Joy. Let us have her carry us through the midterms.
Very clear that Medicaid is on the table. It is very clear that Social Security is on the table. It is very clear that people will die. The baby boomers, the civil rights generation, they knew what they had to do. They were willing to fight and die for their rights. This generation of Congress, they are not meeting the moment. This is an existential crisis.
And also, I might point out, some of them are from the most liberal states like New York, Hawaii, California.
They should be ashamed of themselves.
Okay,
they should have all walked out with him.
Okay. All right. Boy, I tell you what, Sonny and Joy have just the most joyous expressions out there on The View. We'll be back in a second. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Okay, now that we've presided over one of the most awkward and brutally terrible, horrific, nonsensical political party moves, perhaps, of like all time, we're going to talk about some more of the quick news in the world. It's a really, really, really special time to watch the international situation unfold. This morning, I do top news in 10 with the Daily Signal, and every morning at 5, my exhausted rear end hops on the microphone and delivers a couple of quick top headlines around the country. And it's a very special time to find out in this insane news cycle how many things I'm going to have to leave out of a quick news roundup for those that are like on their way to work, for example. And I got to the end of the last quick news roundup this morning, and on the docket was talking about tariffs and then talking about other international issues like the negotiations, for example, between Russia and Ukraine. And the headlines were changing so fast. I made a recording, and then the headline on the tariffs, like the current state of tariffs in the country, completely changed. And so I had to go back and record it again. And then I had recorded the next version of the headline on what the new United States policy on tariffs were, and then it changed again. And so I said, you know what, guys? It ain't happening, Captain. Come back tonight, and we'll try this again. So, international and tariff news. First of all, from Canada, Justin Trudeau is out. He gone. It is not going well for Justin Trudeau. So he was crying earlier this week, which is always the sign of just a leader who's got it together.
On a personal level, I've made sure that every single day in this office, I put Canadians first, that I have people's backs. And that's why I'm here to tell you all that we got you. Even in the very last days of this government, we will not let Canadians down today and long into the future.
Wow. Amazing. Inspiring. Delightful. Now, by the way, he's had his last public appearance. He's been voted out as the Liberal leader. Elections are coming. Trudeau, bye.
It's a touching moment for me. This will be my last public event as Prime Minister. So it's my last one till Sunday night anyway. So it is a big moment for me to be home here in Montreal.
Fantastic stuff. Now, on the U.S.-Canada trade war, Trump is elevating levels of tariffs with Canada in a way that he is not doing with Mexico. India and the United States, this is according to the White House, have agreed to lower tariffs. Trump put up some reciprocal tariffs. India had already had a series of tariffs, especially on United States automotive manufacturers. Now it looks like those two nations are starting to lower the tariffs together, which, by the way, that's how tariffs should work. Reciprocity in a tariff policy makes a lot of sense. Tariffs is a long-standing policy outside of maybe some national security things I personally disagree with. It looks like what Trump is attempting to do is reach a level of reciprocity with the rest of the world on tariffs. He's not saying that, though. And so, again, I am going to withhold my judgment. And the reason I'm going to withhold my judgment is because the headlines do, in fact, change every 15 minutes. For example, President Trump has delayed the tariffs of most kinds from going into effect on Mexico until April the 2nd, which is kind of the next point in time that Trump has marked for implementing tariffs on the international scale or not. Now, a lot of people have said, oh, see, this is Trump. He's caving to Claudia Sheinbaum. Oh, see, this is Mexico getting Trump to back down. And that definitely could be the case. However, from what it looks like in this particular situation, it appears that Donald Trump was already moving away from implementing tariffs up until the 2nd before he had the call with Claudia Sheinbaum. And Claudia Sheinbaum as well has been moving more resources towards stopping fentanyl at the border. Trump has made the tariffs on Mexico and Canada a huge issue on both countries not doing enough to stop fentanyl, which there is a fentanyl crisis in this country. However, it also seems that Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick, the secretaries of the Treasury and Commerce, respectively, are advocating for different policies regarding tariffs. And the American people are also not quite sure how they feel on international tariff policy. Now, why do I point this out? Because Donald Trump is a pragmatist. He is. When it comes to foreign policy, brute force strength stuff, that's Trump's strong suit. Trump's other strong suit is that he's a pragmatist. And so when Trump has an idea that's not a winner, when Donald Trump has an idea that is or isn't possible, there's this silly idea that I've seen from left-leaning pundits that Donald Trump is just going to sink the economy and the stock market's going to crash and we're all going to die, and then he's going to sit there because Trump is stubborn on this. No. There are a lot of different economic factors in play that are going to determine how successful these tariffs are in the early term. And if they are not successful in the early term, they will not be sticking around for the long term. Because Trump is a pragmatist. If you think Donald Trump is going to ride a roughshod economy through to the midterms, that ain't going to happen. I just don't see that being the case given the evidence. And by the way, Carolyn Leavitt seemed to indicate this today. She was asked about President Trump's tariff policies, and she gave a question that was, or she gave an answer that was a little, I feel like there was a little bit more to it than is perhaps at face value, and I'll explain what I mean in a second.
It's just 43 pounds that were found last year. That's less than a carry-on suitcase. Is that a lot of fentanyl compared to, say, Mexico, where the vast majority of the fentanyl is brought in through Mexico, not Canada. So what else does Canada need to do?
You're asking me for what the president's justification is for these tariffs. It's not up to you. You're not the president, Gabe.
2 milligrams. That's all the fentanyl it takes to be potentially lethal to the average adult in America, according to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency.
So that's a small clip from a Daily Signal video that we put out on, again, the amount of fentanyl that it takes. Carolyn Levitt, in her full response, didn't exactly obfuscate and avoid the question in kind of in full force, but she didn't outright say, tariffs are excellent. These are the policy that we're going to be using going forward. Now, I am fully aware that what I'm about to say is complete conjecture, but I believe that based on the patterns at hand, that the tariffs that Donald Trump is imposing on Canada itself are different than the tariffs imposed on India, on China, than on Mexico. We'll talk in a second about the ones that he's probably getting ready to impose via sanctions and tariffs on Russia. I very much doubt that what we are seeing right now is the full story. Now, some could take that and say, whoa, you're saying Trump is playing 4D chess? No, I'm actually one who advocates very much against the idea that Trump is actually out there playing 4D super ultra chess and he's 1,800 steps ahead of everyone else. I think he's a lot more simple than that in a good way, and he's very upfront. Something here is off. That's all I'm going to say. Something here doesn't seem right in the reporter hat or the investigative columnist hat that I wear when I've exposed things before. Something smells a little bit off here. Trump is putting tariffs up in a way that doesn't make sense in prior economic policy that he has employed himself, especially in negotiating, for example, the USMCA agreement. So I'm gonna pump the brakes on that a little bit and say that maybe Trump is messing with elections in Canada a little bit. Maybe Trump is working on foreign policy negotiation stuff. I don't know. And so because I don't know, I'm going to leave things at that particular leave off point to shift over to Russia and Ukraine. So the entire world, on the left side of the aisle at least, has suggested, and well, the establishment Republican side as well, has suggested that throughout the Russo-Ukrainian peace negotiation process that President Trump is trying to start and his team are trying to start, that Donald Trump is only being hard on Zelensky. He's not doing anything bad to Putin, and he's giving Putin all of this amazing confidence. And boy, I tell you what Trump needs to do. He needs to go in there and he needs to tell Putin how it is. Tell him he's the boss and put military bases like right on the border of Russia. Yeah, that's the move. And I didn't quite buy the, oh man, Trump is just kissing the ring of Putin, because I had said that the United States was in the process of looking at what kind of sanctions and tariffs to put on the Russian oil economy while simultaneously increasing tenfold the amount of natural gas and oil exports to Europe so that Europe would be more likely to buy cheaper oil and gas from the United States than from the Russian bear. And now, wouldn't you know it, Trump had this statement on Russia based on the fact that Russia is absolutely pounding Ukraine on the battlefield right now. I'm strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions on tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire and a final settlement agreement on peace is reached. To Russia and Ukraine, get to the table right now before it's too late. Thank you. Radio crew, we'll see you in just a minute for some mail time. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. All right, not quite done with that one for the live stream crew just yet. Dealing with Zelensky and Ukraine is a totally different ballpark than dealing with Russia and Putin. It is. And the reason it is because they are two very different nation states. They have two very different international relations systems. And Putin and Zelensky are two very different leaders. If Trump is going to deal with Zelensky and Ukraine, the America is just going to go in and they're going to bully Russia into doing what it wants militarily is not going to work in a way that diplomatically pulling aid, giving aid to Ukraine does seem to have an effect. Scoreboard. As far as Russia's concerned, I haven't seen a good argument that if the United States just gets in there and starts making really tough military threats, that's going to totally fix the problem and it's going to be fine and it's going to create a lasting peace in the region, which, you know, given that it's Eastern Europe, is quite a tall order. Russia does have a soft underbelly to stab, though, and that's the Russian economy. The Russian economy has struggled ever since it was founded under the fall of the Soviet Union and the reign of the oligarchs. It has struggled ever since then. And since then, the Russian economy has been primarily dependent on pumping dinosaur souls oil out of Siberia and pumping guns into Liberia. So Russian arms manufacturing and distribution, and then energy. So if the United States comes through and undercuts the Russian economy, arms sales aren't enough to sustain it. That's how you undercut Putin. Now, Trump's been saying this for like 10 years. And yet I've heard this from a lot of commentators that I like. Oh, when is Trump finally going to get tough on Putin? They're different games. They are in fact different games to play. And until you get Zelensky openly out there saying, you know what, I am ready to come to the table, I am ready to negotiate peace, which he has done to and including today, then it isn't even worth bringing up the discussion of what Putin is or isn't going to do on the international stage. Because if Zelensky, who hasn't agreed yet to come to the table, is seeing Putin already making concessions, then Zelensky, who didn't want to stop fighting, and up until about a week ago said, we're just going to keep on, we're going to keep fighting, the end of the war is nowhere in sight, all we got to do is get enough resources and we're going to push them all the way back through the Donbass and Crimea. That's not going to end the war. And by the way, Trump has been fairly careful not to actually bring Zelensky to a point of making a ton of concessions either. You'll notice Trump hasn't said, you need to make all of these concessions and you need to give all this stuff up. Trump hasn't done that. Because if either negotiating party, in this case, senses weakness in the other and is able to say, they're already giving concessions, they are starting off behind, then it's going to be a longer process. And by the way, that's not just international negotiations, that's corporate negotiations, that's legal negotiations, that's societal and cultural negotiations and messaging and marketing. There are so many different aspects of negotiation that Donald Trump, as an outsider, actually has a pretty decent head on his shoulders. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes because there's a mail time question that's pretty dead on. It's a Tony Kinnett cast here on The Daily Signal.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
Welcome back. Let's do a little bit of mail time here. Let's dig into some of the questions that have been sent in this week. You can send those over at tonykinnett.com. We'll grab them, sort through them. We have a little bit of a mail segment because it's a nice way to hear back from you guys, and every show has some kind of a little bit of a feedback segment. So this first question is from Ken. And Ken asks, if Putin actually comes to the table, what is he likely to give up? Or does he not give up anything at all and Ukraine gets everything? And the answer to that particular question is that Russia does want some things from the table. Russia is not economically surging right now. And for a large country, that is a severe problem. Russia cannot sustain itself off of the few international partners that it has, mainly China. Ain't working. And so what Russia really does need is international trade to be restored. And right now, other than Europe buying natural gas and oil from the Russians, Russian goods and businesses, especially in the tech sector, which is nigh non-existent in Russia at the moment, that's a serious issue. And so that kind of industrial base is going to need to be restored. So for the release of sanctions and tariffs, which are already present, that are out of Trump's control, but Trump can go pretty much to any individual in the European government and say, hey, ease off on the tariffs, on the sanctions, on the restrictions, that's likely to go through. Russia does need things at the negotiation table. Also, Russia doesn't want NATO forces right up against its borders, which it sees as antagonistic. Now, you can make the argument, well, that's just a load of conspiracy theory hogwash. If military bases of any kind from any country that is not an explicit ally of you are placed on your border, that would make you nervous. Period. And by the way, that's not a defense at all of Putin or the Russian regime in any way, shape, or form. That is a basic diplomatic fact. Military bases on your border not something that countries appear to be a fan of. So, moving on from that, what does Zelensky want out of this? Zelensky probably wants as much of the Donbass and Crimea as he can get back. And you might see an acre for an acre swap in this particular situation because Ukraine has made it into Russian territory a little bit to the northwest of the Donbass and the Crimea. Obviously, Russia's established a pretty stagnant line with the outskirts of those two regions. So you're going to see a little bit of a shift back and forward from there. That's really how I believe this tango is going to play out. As for a demilitarized zone, I have no opinion on that. We're actually getting an expert on the show next week to talk about how a demilitarized zone is created and maintained. And so that's going to be our best means to answer that question for you. All right, the next question is from Jeeves. Nice, the old Ask Jeeves reference here. He asks, throughout the show, you have changed a lot of things to a more national focus. Is there anything that you are keeping Indiana centered? That's a good question. The show started out on 93 WIBC out of Indianapolis, and it grew. And a couple of other radio stations and TV stations around the country agreed to take the show and run it. And I liked more of the national focus because I'm a kind of guy about analysis and pattern recognition. I like breaking down things that I'm seeing on kind of a larger basis for those who aren't spending all day glued to the screen watching every individual detail. So are there things that I'm going to bring up from where I'm at broadcasting out of Indiana still? Oh yeah, absolutely. Usually they come in the most personal of gripes, but they can also come in the form of interacting with local government and how it's going around here, because I think that it's useful to talk about being involved with local government. As for reporting on local Indiana politics stuff, like, oh, the Indiana Secretary of State's assistant, cousin's, wife's, boyfriend's, ex-business partner has a secretary that knew Diego 30 years ago. I don't care about that. I don't think that's as useful. There are other there are other outlets in Indiana that kind of cover that stuff. And so I kind of keep it a little more focused on the national audience. The last question that we're going to hit tonight is, are you going to give producer Daniel a raise for all of the stress that you consistently put him through? So the show gets written every day at about 4:30. The headlines change quite consistently, and you see a lot of podcasts and talk shows come out at around 11:30 a.m., and then they stop coming out at around 2. And then you get to the evening shows, which usually just cover the whole day, but they have a large professional crew that ends up getting that stuff written with a lot of the same material that the 11 to noon to 2 shows come out with. So what I tried to do, my crazy gamble and roll of the dice, is that we start writing the show 2.5 hours before we go on the air, because I want to try to bring those of you who are at home for the evening the most up-to-date details. And so those who are listening to the podcast the next morning on their way to work aren't listening to things that are like 22, 23 hours beforehand, and everything is so old that it's already broken in half. So as for what that does to my producers, it causes them a lot of stress, because we're in a conversation usually about an hour before the show, updating and pulling certain clips, talking about certain updates, for example, on the international stage and how Canada is moving, and whether or not we're going to see a 250% dairy tariff and things like that. And it is a bit of a risky game, and I am perhaps a smidgen worried that producer Daniel is going to develop either an ulcer or have a stroke before the end of the year. But, you know, we'll make sure that no matter what, producer Daniel is well taken care of. And for the record, you know, I should make it expressly clear that as far as the Daily Signal is concerned, I should probably start doing a little bit more of what producer Daniel is suggesting. So on that particular note, it's been a wild week. Next week's going to be a little bit more insane. We've got a huge slate of guests on next week. We have national defense experts that are going to be coming on. We're going to be breaking down with E.J. Anthony of the Heritage Foundation a little bit on the macroeconomics and what the stock market is going to be doing over the next month, how interest rates factor into that. And most importantly, we're going to branch out. maybe a little bit across the aisle and, stick the stethoscope up to the left side and figure out if there is a shred of a pulse left in that rotting carcass of a political organization. I'm Tony Kinnett. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast, syndicated nationally on the Daily Signals Network, first on 93 WIBC out of Indianapolis, produced by Daniel Elmore, Scataglia, Allison Lemons. Have a wonderful weekend and take care.